Welcome to At the Open Gate. Thanks for joining us this morning, everybody. This is I think our 8th or 9th webinar we've done now on these monthly webinars. And today we're talking about relationship Aikido, skills for managing difficult behaviors. And my guest this morning is Janie Matson. Welcome, Janie.
Hello, good morning to everyone.
Yeah, we're glad to have you here. And Janie has joined us once before, so I'm really interested to have your thoughts on this topic. And for those of you that haven't joined us before, these monthly webinars are just simply an opportunity for you to exhale and get a small bite of information. We keep it intentionally short so that you can just get a quick bite of time and some tips that will help you moving forward. And also just enjoy the community of peers. So even though this is a webinar format, we encourage you to engage with us during this hour. We welcome your comments and questions. So if you look at the bottom of your screen, that you'll see the opportunity in the chat box, which if you click on more and then chat, that'll bring up your chat box. And if you look at the chat box in the two, there's another drop down. They make this a little challenging, but if you click on all attendees, then you can type in a chat. So we'd love to hear from you. If you want to say hello this morning in the chat box, let us know you're out there. That would be awesome. And I always like to start with a little poll, how are you doing type of a poll. And so I see some of you are already starting to answer that, but the question being which word or phrase best describes your current state of being. And I just realized I launched, let's see. And so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. And 67, can you see the results, Janie? Can you see
Yes,
that?
I can.
Yeah, so hanging in there, about 3/4 of you. Some of you are still concerned getting a plan. Some of you are thankful for good health. Some of you getting caught up on Netflix. And some of you have organized and color-coded everything, which I'd like to be in that category, but I'm not quite there yet. So awesome. Well, thanks for joining in on that. And so we'll just get going. So we got a short amount of time, and let's talk about relationship Aikido and what all that means. So I'd like to start us out with this first quote. Again, we're talking about dealing with difficult and challenging people. And Janie, you and I know, have made a career out of that. And some days I kind of ask myself, what was I thinking? But at the same time, I think it's just been really interesting to learn about people. And I think you and I, in the roles that we have, you as a mental health counselor and me as a counselor and also working as a coach, we get to work in a very contained way with challenging people. And I know with managers, it's a lot more challenging. You know, you have to get the job done. Sometimes you don't know when or how people are being challenging. You just know something's a little bit off. And so I love this quote that in order to master compassion, you have to spend time getting to know monsters. And when you can do that, you will see that there are no monsters, only that people acted like monsters because no one gave them the time or compassion to hear their story. So Janie, have you got any reactions to that?
Yeah, I think about in a work setting, everyone brings their family of origin to work, their person, and realizing that as a manager or a supervisor, I think really helps that they have their story and we have our story. And knowing ourselves well, which is, I think, a part of this too, as managers, as supervisors, to knowing ourselves and our story and what might trigger us too, as well as your employees.
Right.
And having compassion for that, because we all have pain.
Right. Right. No, I think that's so true. And I think, again, what's for me too, it's just difficult. And for the folks on the call is that we, you know, difficult people just bring out so much in us, right? They hit all of our hot buttons and contribute to us not being our best selves. And it's a fine balance between being assertive and being kind and compassionate, and finding that balance is, I think, why leaders in particular find it so challenging. So
Yes.
so let's try to figure this one out.
Yes.
So, and then maybe many of you on the call are wondering, well, why the word Aikido, and what does that have to do with communication or anything? And I took some training in this years ago. I would love to restart this someday, but it is a wonderful martial art that people that practice it use, because it's not brute force. It is really a gentle martial art where people defend themselves while also protecting their attackers from injury. And so the goal is really is overcoming ourselves instead of cultivating violence or aggressiveness. So it's a really fascinating martial art where you're using the energy of the other person to bring about a positive result. And so I just think it just has a great kind of syncing with the communication arts as well, and some things that we can learn from that. So so what we wanted to examine today are really two very specific challenging behaviors. And when Janie and I were preparing for this, we easily figured this could be a day-long webinar because it's such a deep topic and there's just so much to it. But passive aggression and bullying are two that I think vex people a lot. And Janie, do you have any thoughts on, why it's worth our time even kind of figuring out how to handle these things?
Well, certainly these are the most triggering of behaviors, and they can cause the most damage, I think, in offices. People need to feel safe in their work environment. It really undermines all trust. And trust is the foundation of a work environment of safety. Right. So passive aggressive behavior violates trust, and certainly bullying does. And passive aggression is more covert. We don't see that. We might feel it. Oh, I just got stung by that person. Right. But bullying is obviously more overt and can be more dangerous.
Right, right. Well, and you made the good point too, that it's impacting trust, and not only ours with that person as an individual, but it tends to impact and infect the whole team.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. And everybody's feeling the results of that behavior, but I think it's so hard because we can't always put a finger on it, and what's, it really takes a lot of detective work, especially with passive aggression. Another thing that I'm real curious about, Janie, and I think you being in the field will relate to this, is that I was taught years ago when we were learning about, say, mental health disorders, for example, that we want to try not to refer to a person by a label. For example, I wouldn't refer to a person with schizophrenia as a schizophrenic, because it tends to define who that person is. And so rather we say a person with schizophrenia who's suffering from schizophrenia. And I know in a lot of communications classes, and for those folks on the call, you'll find yourself in these situations where you hear types of persons, right? There's the bully, there's the passive aggressive person. And so I caution everyone to think about, the way we communicate about these things even is labeling people.
Absolutely. Because that negative label can be so destructive. And, just like in high school or junior high, when somebody got labeled as a bad kid, then you tend to have all this animosity, and you don't see the good in the person. And again, we go back to maybe the first slide of having that compassion, knowing that this is coming from a place of this person does not have coping skills. Right. They get easily triggered. They have not learned the healthier coping skills. So we want to keep it to behaviors versus they're a bad person.
Exactly.
Characterological. We don't want to go there.
Exactly.
These are bad behaviors, though, I would say that.
Exactly. Well,
in the workplace.
And on the flip side, to give balance to this, because I know Janie and I are really emphasizing the compassion aspect of it and the empathy aspect. Again, what's I think so critical in dealing with passive aggression and bullying is that you actually have to be quite firm
Yes.
as well, right?
Yes.
So
Setting the boundaries. Yes,
right,
absolutely. And
right. So
again, knowing from the keto standpoint of this is where the preparedness of the supervisor manager is so important, that they've given this some thought, or if this problem comes up at work, that you really go into yourself and figure out what is triggering me, how am I likely to get triggered dealing with this person, and what am I going to do to
exactly,
avoid more damage.
exactly. So awesome. All right. So, well, it starts, since this is such a, can be a kind of a vague term, let's start with a quick definition. And I loved this one, which is what is passive aggression? And the technical definition is really a person who's unable to express their feelings honestly and directly. And so instead they're communicating those negative feelings through more indirect means. But I like what we put on the slide a little bit better because it makes it more clear to me. So a passive person has the mindset of they respect your rights, but not mine. An aggressive person means I respect my rights, but not yours. And then the passive aggressive person or behavior, passive aggressive behavior, see, I slip too, is I appear to respect your rights, but really I don't. And Janie, you touched on a little earlier why it's so difficult to address these behaviors. Do you have any more thoughts on that?
Well, because often the person is saying, yes, sure, Nancy, I'll finish that assignment. I'll get that in, no problem. They're very agreeable, but you're constantly having, they're not following through with their action. Or they're friendly to your face, but you sense there's something they aren't really saying. And it comes out in some behavioral way, whether it's through an email that might be a little testy or snarky, or there's some kind of manipulation or backstabbing that goes on. Again, some of these things I think we'll get into with some of these behaviors, but yeah, I guess that's, well, maybe we can go into some of the behaviors and we can show them.
Yeah, you bet. And I think too, one of the indicators for me is just if you're constantly feeling like conversations with that person where you're frustrated, you're questioning yourself, you're feeling demeaned, and then we have this tendency, I think, to dismiss our own feelings, right? Well, maybe I'm just being too sensitive. And if that's a pattern with someone, that might be a good clue that you're dealing with someone who's passive aggressive. So
the other thing, Nancy, I think we talked about was there's a feeling. There's definitely a feeling of that you might get of anger or irritation, or like what? Just confusing, going around in circles. That's a really good indicator that you really are dealing with something that's deeper.
Excellent. Yeah, good point. And here's your slide, Janie. Here's some, and to everyone on the call, this is definitely not a exhaustive list. These are just
Because
a few.
people are very creative with this.
Exactly. Very creative. So there's just a couple to get us started, but yeah, some of the behaviors. So Janie, do you have any thoughts on these?
Well, I think what you hear most about is when there isn't trust in a work environment, or someone, let's say the person with this behavioral problem, doesn't feel that they can be open and honest. I mean, otherwise they'd be doing that, right? So they have to manipulate in some way or get some power in some way. This is a way of expressing anger or powerlessness. Let's look at it that way. So then they might, gossip, or there might be the rolling of the eyes, oh brother, that kind of statement being said under their breath when the supervisor comes out and asks them to do something. So those are, they might be quiet, withdrawn, give you kind of, yeah, yes, I'll do it. But, you know, you get this vibe because they aren't really talking. It's more stonewalling.
Right.
Or they're not completing the task.
Right.
You know, you say, hey, I need this. Hey, or we need to discuss this on Wednesday. How are you doing?
Right.
You know, oh, I'll get it to you. I'll get it to you. I'll get it to you. And then comes Wednesday, it's not happening.
Right.
So there you are. Then you're in it, and then you're frustrated, and then it's time to decide, okay, how am I going to deal with this behavior?
Right. And I think another one that's really hard that I've noticed, or in working with supervisors that I think is really hard, is the person who maybe has a lot of personal things going on in their lives. And so so you're trying to bridge that, okay, I need to be compassionate, but at the same time, work's not getting done. And this person always seems to have an excuse. And so there's kind of an element, could be an element of drama in the way it plays out. And so it comes to what we'll talk about next, which is really, how do you deal with it, right? How do you respond? And I think that's really the meat of this challenge is, you know, again, that holding people accountable and focusing, like you said earlier, Janie, focusing on behaviors and, you know, really focusing on the performance aspect of it. People often get caught up in the emotional thing. And if you can keep it to behaviors, that simplifies it a lot.
I think going back to the Aikido model too, then just really going within ourselves and deciding, okay, I've got a problem with this employee. These behaviors are problems. They're undermining trust with either you and your employee or within the group. Right. And so just really getting settled again on knowing yourself and knowing what your triggers are. And also thinking of them and what might it be? What might they really be angry about? You know, what do you think is going on? How do they feel powerless? Just trying to get into their skin to do a little bit of that empathy, compassion piece. And then really documenting with behaviors that are unacceptable, that undermine the trust, and speaking to that.
Right. And I think what you point out, Janie, too, is really the critical difference, what we're talking about today compared to what I've seen over the years in communication classes and trainings that I've been through, because often there will be a model that's proposed, and I'll give you I'll share a couple steps that folks listening can use, and you may have even heard before. But I think the key difference is what you just said, is what gets forgotten is we've got to start with that place of empathy and compassion, and trying to kind of let the person know we understand, right? We understand that either they feel powerless or angry or frustrated or something. And that really goes to that detective work that you were talking about. And then simply reflecting back to that person, you know, their feelings a little bit. And we overlook that step.
Yes, and then if you can get to that with a person, if they allow you in to have that discussion, then you can talk to them about this particular behavior won't get you what you want, which is, you know, whatever result it is.
Exactly.
That is just going to undermine communication. And again, if we go back to the model of, if they knew how to communicate more effectively, they would be doing it.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, that's why all of us can slip into these things. I don't want to say that, you know, that I have never done anything passive aggressive. You know, I'm sure I have.
Really? No, we're perfect.
It's patterns. You know, this is a pattern that you're concerned about with someone versus just a one-off, right? Exactly.
Well, and you make a good point, is that we don't want to consistently accuse people of being passive aggressive as well. So yeah, you're looking at it as a pattern and when it's becoming problematic. So Yeah, excellent. Well, let's move into bullying for a few minutes. I want to leave a couple minutes for questions if we have any. And if you are having any questions out there, feel free to click on the Q&A, and you can certainly post your questions, and we'll try to share those at the end of our time. But let's talk a little bit about bullying and give a definition of that. So that's an ongoing, deliberate misuse of power in relationships. Could be verbal, physical. Probably more what we see in the workplace is the social behavior, because people are pretty, as you said, Janie, creative, and people are pretty sophisticated at masking overt aggression. So maybe more the social aggression that intends to cause physical or psychological harm. So it's not a single episode of rejection or a random act where somebody gets upset one time, or a mutual argument where both people are escalating. That's not bullying. Bullying is, again, that ongoing and very deliberate and intentional misuse of power. So yeah, and I know, Janie, I mean, having worked with you in the EAP field, oftentimes when people have bullying and aggressive behavior, they used to get referred to me, and then I would refer them to you as a counselor to do an assessment on those folks. What's been your experience with bullying behavior?
Well, I was thinking about this, Nancy, you know, that generally, just for the folks on the call to know that often employee assistance programs are used when someone has really overstepped the line, and it is either hostile or totally unacceptable, threatens someone,
right,
hit someone even. So then, in order to keep their job, they are sent to an employee assistance program and a therapist to actually work it through to see if they can work that through and return to work. So what I have noticed is that there is a period of time where somebody will reflect on their behavior after the incident, after they're called into the office, after they might have to go to HR, after they're referred to employee assistance. That by the time they reach me, they've reflected on what they did wrong. And I think one of the first questions I ask is, do you actually want to continue to work at your place of employment? Because this is unacceptable behavior.
Yeah.
And I think just laying that boundary out in the beginning, and they'll say yes. And I've had people say, no, I don't really care. Then you don't have the commitment, and then it's pretty much over. But if somebody says, yes, I do want to work there, then I just say that behavior is unacceptable.
Yeah.
You need to work on other ways. What are we going to do to prevent that from happening? What can you do? And we, you know, if somebody escalates or someone has a conflict with a coworker, what are we going to do to not to resort to bullying? Because again, we go back to this person doesn't have coping skills in certain situations.
Right.
And it could be, again, they're from a family where they have authoritarian parent and they get triggered by a boss. I mean, there are all kinds of scenarios.
Awesome. Yeah.
But it's setting those boundaries and keeping a safe work environment is, of course, the most important.
It's critical
piece for the supervisor.
Great. And you touched on, I think Dottie asked a really good question in the Q&A. She said, Dottie, thank you. She said, is passive aggressive behavior learned? And if so, and you touched on that a little bit, but if so, what then role should managers play to help someone unlearn this behavior? So excellent question. Any thoughts on that?
Good. Thank you. Yes, I think it is learned. Generally, we would think it comes from family of origin where, you know, when you think about child and parent, did the child have a voice? Were they able to express their frustration and anger with their parent and their parent listened? Or did the parent have a more authoritarian, you know, my voice counts, yours doesn't, just be quiet. And then people they create this way of getting back actually to get some attention. You know, the child will refuse to go to school, or the child won't do their homework. This is a perfect one. They won't do they'll do their homework, but they won't turn it in. Because they have a lot of resentment with or underlying power issues with their parents. Something's going on with them. So that is a more juvenile or adolescent way of being passive aggressive.
Yeah.
It's that powerlessness we want to look for. So to remedy that is to build trust, with your employee, to listen to them, to encourage them to speak up at least to you, and to constantly have that rapport of, what's going on, how are you feeling? If you know that they have this issue, always the feelings when they feel powerless. How are you feeling about the way things are going? How are you feeling about the way things are going with our relationship? What are you needing from me?
Right. Whoops. Yeah, and then also just back to holding people accountable to that behavior too, as well. Yes. So it's that, that balance that I think is so challenging, right? And it's the art, I think, of dealing with. I think it's, again, what you and I have learned over years and years of dealing with very challenging people, very specifically on those behaviors. But I know if you're a manager, you've got a million things on your plate.
What are they wanting? What are they hoping to get out of that kind of behavior? Because that kind of behavior isn't going to get them what they want.
Right. Exactly. And I love that. I love that question. So, all right, we've got just a few minutes. I'm going to go through the next couple slides a little more quickly, but we wanted to talk about some of the behaviors. And so as you take a look at that list, Janie, does that spark anything that you want to share with our call?
Yeah, I was thinking of blaming the victim. That is really, really in the employee assistance. Often they'll be blaming the other person, not taking responsibility. That's a red flag, honestly, for you as a supervisor. That's a red flag if they don't take on responsibility, that you might have a deeper problem with this employee.
Right.
And also it's setting the guidelines. We didn't get a chance to talk too much about that, Nancy, the setting of the guidelines for communication, for behavior, for values within your organization.
Right.
That you have respect, that you don't criticize unkindly any of your fellow coworkers, that they can trust that there's a general feeling of safety. And so then you can refer back to your value system that you have set up as managers, that these things are unacceptable.
Exactly.
They don't promote trust and safety. Yeah. So dehumanizing, this is, again, it can be in smaller ways or just like an email zap,
right.
They could talk to you personally, but instead they send, and then they send it to the supervisor.
Right.
Coworkers can do that.
Right. Yeah, and that can be done through a like a team guidelines or team operating agreement, where you basically focus on the behaviors and the norms that you want, and it's a great foundation setting. So that, I'm glad you called that out, Jeannie.
And I think in staff meetings and continually, I think the supervisor has to continue to remind, this is the way we behave. Just every time somebody does something right, to say it. Hey, thanks for bringing that up. Thanks for doing it. Thanks for handling it that way. I really like the way you did that.
Exactly. And I'm going to wrap us up with a couple thoughts on how to deal with bullying behaviors. And I think, again, it's very similar to what we've talked about with passive aggressive. It's about sharing empathy. It's about setting those boundaries and guidelines. It's about telling the person what the behavior is, calling it out, and then saying what you expect differently. The one change I would add to bullying that I want to encourage everyone is just to recognize that it's a really tough one to go alone. You might have reactions yourself. Some folks can be really intimidated by a bullying behavior, and recognize that if it's, because bullying behavior really only responds to very strong assertive response. So you really have to kind of, if that's tough for you, you really have to kind of work on that. And so I would say, don't go it alone. Make sure you've got your trusted advisor, colleague, your human resources department. If you have an employee assistance program, usually there are management consultations where you can talk with someone like me or Janie. So if you're dealing with a situation where you're feeling bullied, make sure you're getting help on that. So And we'll have a few more of the details on our follow-up email that we'll send to you. We'll give you a document that outlines our conversation today. So with that, I would ask everyone to think about maybe one small action you can take as a result of our conversation today, or if you are dealing with someone that you recognize that has one of these behaviors, maybe think about something. If you want to put it in the chat, we'd love to hear from you. And then join us again next month on the 23rd of September. My colleague and friend Cal Beyer is going to help us talk about a vital leadership competency, which is mental health and suicide prevention, in honor of Suicide Prevention Week next month. And so difficult topic, but one I encourage folks to join us in, because as a leader, at some point, I guarantee you in your career, you will probably deal with a mental health issue at a minimum. So it'll be a great conversation. Thanks, Jen. And so with that, there's the link here. It'll come in your follow-up email as well. Please encourage others to join us if you found this useful, and I hope you all have a great day. We'll close it up and let you get on your day on time. That's a big value of mine. So Janie, thank you so much for your gracious gift of time today.
Thank you for having me.
You bet. All right, everyone. Have a great day.